Chapter 231. Karen Daly quietly turned to look at Kevin Kyle. Dressed in a white shirt, he stood straight and lifted his chin slightly. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked straight ahead as if he were a perfect sculpture. However, what she saw was not just Kevin's elegant temperament and beautiful appearance. She seemed to be able to see his heart as if he was surrounded by endless loneliness and pain. He seemed so helpless. In her short few years of memories, she had never fallen in love, and she didn't know what it felt like to be in love. She had heard people say that love was like a double-edged sword, which could serve as armor, but also a weakness. Now Kevin Kyle, who had lost his Karen Daly, was a person who had no weakness and yet lost his armor at the same time. The Karen Daly had once given Kevin the most beautiful things in life, and when she disappeared, she also silently destroyed everything in him. Kevin was still so dazzling in the crowd, but his body seemed to be covered with a thin layer of ice, so cold that no one would dare to get close to him. The most desperate and helpless thing about Kevin was that his wife was still smiling and waiting for him to return from his business trip. When he was back, she had gone, and there was no chance for them to meet again in this life. However, for Kevin, those things were already in the past, and now there were even more cruel things happening to him. His wife was in front of him. As long as he reached out, he could touch her, but she did not remember him. An invisible wall separated her from him. They could hear each other and feel each other, but their hearts could not touch each other. There were 8 hardships in life: life itself, old age, illness, death, love but separation, long-term grievances, begging, and being unable to let go. To have loved and lost, it was painful. Kevin suddenly burst into laughter. His laughter was low, and his eyes under his golden glasses were slightly narrowed, as if there was a flash of tears. Karen looked at his smile but felt that it was more uncomfortable than looking at a person crying. Our child was saved and is growing up well. She is very cute and sensible. She's almost all the fun in my life. Kevin looked at Karen and continued, when her mother was pregnant, she told me that when the child is 1 year old, we will take a family photo. In the future, whenever the child grows a year older, we will take another family photo. But there would never be a chance to complete such a dream. Karen couldn't help but pity Kevin. It was heartbreaking. Kevin's low and magnetic voice knocked on Karen's heart again and again. She even wanted to go up and hold his clenched fist to give him some strength and comfort. But she didn't do that, and she didn't have a right to do that either. She didn't even know what was in Kevin's mind to take her to see his deceased wife. Just as she was unsure, she heard Kevin say in a deep voice, "She has been away from us for 3 years. 3 years have passed. Should we forget her?" He was asking Karen, but Karen believed that Kevin already had his own answer in his heart. He didn't want her answer, so Karen didn't answer. Karen did not speak, but she was thinking for Kevin. People had to move forward if they were alive, instead of continuing to live in the past. If Kevin's wife could see this, she must not have wanted to see him suffer so much. She certainly hoped that he would forget the past as soon as possible and start a new life with his lovely child. Karen. Kevin Kyle suddenly shouted Karen, but Karen Daly didn't know if he was calling his wife or her, so she didn't answer. "Give me a chance to pursue you." Kevin's low and seductive voice rang in Karen's ears. She was so shocked by his words that her head was buzzing. Was there any problem with him? He first told her a lot of stories about him and his deceased wife. Before she could digest that sad story, he said that he wanted to pursue her in front of her. Although his wife had passed away for 3 years, it was still unbelievable for him to say that he wanted to pursue another woman at her grave. However, after thinking about it carefully, Karen could understand it. It was because she was somewhat similar to Kevin's deceased wife leading him to these incredulous things. He said that he wanted to pursue her, but she was afraid that he didn't really want to pursue her, but regarded her as his deceased wife. He wanted to start over with his deceased wife. Kevin's eyes followed Karen closely, wanting to get her positive answer. While he waited, his nervous heart was in a cold sweat. Karen smiled apologetically and said, "Mr. Kyle, although my name is also Karen Daly, I am me. I have nothing to do with your wife. I don't want to be someone else's substitute." Karen's answer made Kevin feel as if his heart had been torn apart. He held his breath and came to his senses after a long time. He stared at Karen with burning eyes and asked solemnly again, "Karen, you are not a substitute, but you are yourself. Are you willing to try this?" Karen was back. She had forgotten everything in the past, so she was a new Karen. Whether it was the past Karen or the present Karen, for Kevin, they were both Karen Daly. He could let the previous Karen Daly go and pursue a brand new Karen Daly so that they could start over again. Because he knew that Karen had many pursuers around her, Kevin felt a heavy sense of crisis. He had no time to wait, so he had to let her accept him as soon as possible. Even if she couldn't accept him, he hoped that she could stay by his side and protect her from other people who wanted to get close to her. Karen wanted to refuse at once, but when she looked at Kevin's eyes, she could not say so. Even she herself didn't know why she didn't want to see Kevin so sad. If she refused him, she would feel guilty. However, rationality eventually defeated emotions. Karen shook her head and said very calmly, "Mr. Kyle, did I do something to make you misunderstand? In fact, I really don't have any improper thoughts about you. Karen, it's I who want to pursue you." Kevin grabbed Karen's shoulder and said, "I don't want you to say that you have nothing to do with me. I just want you to give me a chance for me to pursue you." Karen said, "Mr. Kyle, I really—" Kevin interrupted her and said, "Let's stay in touch with each other and go out together. If you think I'm not a good person and it's not what you want, you can break up the relationship at any time." Karen shook her head and said, "Mr. Kyle, it's not fair to you." Chapter 232. As long as Karen Daly promised to date Kevin Kyle, he would never give her the chance to say no, so it was not unfair for him. Kevin looked at Karen, and his eyes became more gentle, and his voice became more seductive. "Karen, let's give each other a chance, okay?" Kevin looked at Karen. She once again saw a sea of stars in his eyes, which deeply attracted her, as if there was an endless force pulling her, wanting to take her into the sea of stars to see what was going on. Perhaps it was not bad to fall in love with a man like Kevin Kyle. It could satisfy her curiosity, and she could get closer to little Karen more openly. "Then, let's have a try?" Karen was also shocked by her own words. She just thought of it, but why did she say it out loud? He had said that she was not a substitute, but who knew if he was only saying this in front of her? Even when Kevin called her by her name, she did not know whether he was calling her or his deceased wife. As soon as Karen finished her sentence, she was pulled into Kevin's arms and he hugged her tightly. It seemed that he used all his strength, and he was so strong that it seemed that Karen was going to be crushed by his bones. "Karen, Karen." Kevin called out this name again and again. Karen did not know if he was calling her name or calling his deceased wife. She tried to struggle, but compared to Kevin, her strength was like an ant trying to take down an elephant. The difference was too much, so she didn't do anything at all. "Karen." Karen didn't say anything. "Karen, answer me." He hooked her chin and looked at her with burning eyes. "Just tell me what you want to say," Karen whispered. She did not look at him in the eyes. His masculine aura was so strong that when she looked at him, her heart would beat faster. Her head would heat up, and her thinking would be slowed down by more than half a beat. "I don't want to say anything. I just want to call your name. I want to hear your voice." Kevin smiled and put her head against him again. He gently raised her head and said, "Let me hear some more words." He told her to let him listen to her voice. He hugged her close so that he could believe that she had really returned to his side. "Mr. Kyle, we are not that close yet. Can you let me go first?" She had agreed to let him pursue her, not to be his girlfriend. Was it too much for him to do so? "I won't let go," Kevin said childishly. How could he let her go again? He would never let go of her for the rest of his life. Karen was speechless. Is this person still the one she first met? Kevin stretched out his hand and pushed her hair behind her ears. Then he held her head and leaned over to kiss her. Karen immediately turned her head away when she saw that something was wrong. She had promised him that he could pursue her, but did not promise to be his girlfriend. But now, he hugged her and wanted to kiss her again. It was going too fast. Kevin also realized that he was too anxious. The woman beside him was a completely new Karen Daly. He thought it was normal to kiss her, but he was actually not that close to the brand new Karen Daly. It was the same for her, and she was wary of him. He was too eager, and it was not good for him to rush their relationship. He still needed to take his time according to her pace. However, Kevin was already very happy to have such a result today. He had another chance to pursue Karen and had the opportunity to have her again. In the future, as long as he worked harder, he could bring Karen back to his side and protect her under his wings. On the way back, Kevin's mood was completely different from when he was going over. His sword-shaped eyebrows were slightly raised, and his sexy, thin lips were slightly hooked. It could be seen that he was happy no matter how she looked at it. Karen's mood was also different from when she came here. She felt like she was floating, and she couldn't believe that what she had experienced today was true. Only then did she realize that Kevin was not only little Karen's father or a sad husband who had lost his wife. He also had an attractive identity. He was the head of Ravio Corporation Inc. Not to mention his cool demeanor, his position as the leader of Ravio Corporation Inc. was enough for many women to throw themselves into his arms. The reason why he chose her was not because of how good she was, but because she had the same name as his deceased wife, and her appearance was somewhat similar. After that, she really regretted agreeing to Kevin Kyle's request. But how? Could she tell him that she would renege on her words? Karen quietly glanced at Kevin, who was driving, and saw that his eyes were smiling. If she said she regretted it now, would he suddenly change his expression and throw her out of the window? Noticing Karen's gaze, Kevin slowed down and reached out one of his hands to grab Karen's. He asked softly, "What's wrong?" Suddenly her hand was caught, her body was slightly stiff, and she instantly forgot what she wanted to say to Kevin. All her attention was focused on his palm. His palm was very hot, and his fingers were very strong. Her hand was held in his palm. For some reason, he didn't want to pull back his hand. Who is taking care of little Karen today? Karen didn't want to say that she was regretting, but she had to answer Kevin's question. Thinking about it, she thought of little Karen. Today, there are only 2 of us here. Don't mention little Karen. Karen had promised to give him an opportunity. Little Karen would only create a lot of trouble on the side, so he didn't want to mention the little one. Hearing Kevin's words, Karen was very unhappy. Little Karen is your child. Your wife was thinking about saving her little life even at such a dangerous moment. You can't ignore little Karen after having a new lover. If Kevin neglected little Karen because of her, Karen would never accept it. Little Karen was so cute. Karen always hoped that little Karen should grow up healthily and happily. No one could hurt little Karen, including her own father. Kevin was stunned and said, "Do you want to take little Karen with us on every date in the future?" A little third wheel? Kevin thought. There's nothing wrong with having little Karen around, Karen replied. It was better to have little Karen around. In Karen's heart, she hoped to see little Karen, not little Karen's father. She would agree to Kevin's request, mostly because of little Karen. She did not want Kevin Kyle to marry another woman. She was worried that other women would treat little Karen badly as her stepmother. Kevin just felt that it was hard for him to be alone with Karen, so he wanted to enjoy their 2-person world. However, he forgot that Karen cared more about little Karen than about him. It seemed that little Karen, this little third wheel, could still be put into use to help with his relationship with Karen. Kevin thought. Chapter 233. Buzz. Karen Daly's mobile phone in her bag suddenly rang, and she immediately pulled back her hand. She opened the bag and took out her mobile phone. When she saw that it was her father's call, she unconsciously smiled and said, "Dad, I'm not at the company today. I came out with a friend. It's nothing. It's just a friend who I've just met." "Do a little sightseeing," Karen added. "What? Did you get into a car accident when you went out?" Karen suddenly asked. "Which hospital are you in? I'll go and find you right away." Seeing Karen's expression and listening to her tone, Kevin could roughly judge Samuel Daly's position in Karen's heart. Samuel Daly's image of a loving father, which had been carefully crafted in front of Karen in the past 3 years, was very successful. It could make Karen trust him so much and rely on him. Samuel Daly could see through people's minds very well and knew what kind of image should be created in front of Karen, so she could be within his control easily. Threats could only work temporarily, and no one could be controlled by force for a lifetime. On the contrary, his fatherly image gave Karen a sense of security. In this way, he could have Karen firmly in his grasp. Under such circumstances, if Kevin told Karen that this father was not her biological father, she would never believe him. Karen not only would not believe it, but she might even think that Kevin was a madman and would avoid him. Kevin knew Samuel Daly's real intention. Of course, he couldn't be stupid enough to provoke Samuel Daly. He could only think of a way to let Karen slowly recall the past. Kevin was just going on a date with Karen Daly today, and Samuel Daly had a car accident. He didn't know whether it was really a car accident or Samuel Daly's trick. After Karen hung up the phone, Kevin immediately said, "Did something happen to Uncle?" Karen nodded and said in a hurry, "Mr. Kyle, if it's convenient, could you please send me to the Chatterton First People Hospital?" Kevin had only just felt that he would be able to get Karen back again. But as soon as she addressed him Mr. Kyle, it sent Kevin back to crucial reality. It turned out that in Karen's mind, he was still a stranger. She would not be able to pay attention nor care for him that way. Kevin did not respond, and Karen simply thought that it was inconvenient for him. She added, "If it's not convenient for you, please find a place to stop. I can take a taxi to the hospital on my own." "Karen, I will take you there," Kevin said suddenly. "As long as it's something you want, I'm willing to do it. And not just sending you to the hospital to see Samuel Daly. Even if you asked me to go to Samuel Daly and let him stab me twice, I would have no complaints," Kevin thought. However, he could only hide his thoughts in his heart. Karen would not understand. All of her thoughts were on Samuel Daly. They had no other relatives in the Chatterton town. When her father got into this car accident, he would not have anyone to take care of him. As her father's only relative, Karen had to rush over to take care of her father as soon as possible. Kevin had intended to bring Karen out for dinner, and then take her to the places they often visited together, hoping that she could recall some memories. He did not expect that Samuel Daly would interrupt the plan with just a phone call. Samuel Daly was really unforgivable. Samuel Daly's injury was not serious. It was almost not even an injury. He had just been frightened while crossing the road. He fell to the ground for a long time and did not get up. The driver was worried that something would happen, so he sent him to the hospital. The doctor also did a checkup, and there was not even a scratch on his skin. Seeing that Samuel Daly was fine, Karen also breathed a sigh of relief. In the past 3 years, Karen Daly only knew how to work. She was an idiot when it came to life skills. Without her father by her side, she didn't even know if she could live like a normal person. Through the transparent glass window, Kevin's sharp eyes fell on Samuel Daly. Samuel Daly also raised his head and looked at him with an arrogant look in his eyes. He seemed to say to Kevin Kyle, "I hold the person you care most in my hand. No matter what you do, you should think about the consequences." Kevin looked at him, and his thin lips curved into a faint smile. Just as he was about to say something, Karen followed Samuel Daly's gaze and then nodded and smiled at Kevin. Kevin Kyle's face almost changed immediately, and he nodded back at Karen Daly with a smile. He had to admit that Samuel Daly had targeted his most fatal weakness. As long as Karen did not restore her memory, he could not do anything to Samuel Daly. He took another look at Samuel Daly and Karen, who were talking and laughing in the ward. Kevin Kyle stepped aside and dialed a phone number. "I asked you to keep an eye on Samuel Daly." "What happened now?" Nick Black's voice came from the phone. "President Kevin, because I didn't know you were with your wife earlier. Samuel Daly wasn't doing anything to create trouble, so we just left him alone. The next time when I'm with Karen, keep an eye on Samuel Daly," Kevin ordered coldly and hung up the phone. Their date had been interrupted by that beast. How could he feel all right about it? "Mr. Kyle." Suddenly, Karen's polite voice came from behind. Kevin looked back at her and emphasized, "Kevin. Call me Kevin. Kevin, thank you for sending me to the hospital." Karen smiled politely and said, "My dad is fine. You can go back first. I'll settle the procedures for him later." Kevin said, "I've already asked someone to help you settle the procedures. You don't have to worry about it anymore." Karen said, "Thank you very much for today." "Karen, don't be so polite to me." Kevin looked at her and said seriously, "You are my future girlfriend. I should do everything for you." "Karen," Kevin added, "if you are satisfied with what I have done today, remember to give me a star." She did not understand what he meant. Kevin grabbed Karen Daly's hand, rolled up her fingers one by one, and made her hold a fist. "As long as I get 5 stars, you will promise to be my girlfriend." In a panic, Karen pulled back her hand. "Don't rush it then. Take your time," she said. As soon as Karen finished her words, Kevin pulled her into his arms and said, "I still have something to do, so I have to go first. I'll ask someone to send you home." Karen shook her head and said, "It's okay that we take a taxi back. You don't have to worry about it." Kevin said, "You have to give me the chance to perform, or I'll be worried that I won't be able to get through this probation." Karen Daly. Why did she feel that this man suddenly seemed to have changed into a different person? He was still very serious, with a hint of lightheartedness, and he was also frivolous at times. Could it be that she had misjudged him? Chapter 234. "Karen, was the man your friend?" When she returned to the ward, she saw her father asked with a worried face. Karen Daly nodded honestly and said, "He is the father of the little baby girl I told you before." Samuel Daly looked at Karen and wanted to say something, but stopped. It seemed that there were a lot of things that he wanted to say to her, but he couldn't say it out loud. "Dad, if you have something to say, just say it." Karen helped Samuel Daly stand up and said while walking, "I am your daughter. Is there anything that you can't tell me?" Samuel Daly touched Karen's head and let out a long sigh. "Your mother left early, leaving only us to rely on each other. If anything bad happens to you, I will definitely die." Karen said, "Dad, why do you suddenly say such sad words?" "I'll be fine. I'll stay by your side and take care of you. I know that you are a good girl." But Samuel Daly shook his head and sighed deeply. Then he said, "That man is the head of the Ravio Corporation, Inc. We are not in the same world as him." "Dad, I know. I know what I'm doing." She nodded and felt sad in her heart, but she couldn't explain how she felt. She had promised Kevin so quickly that he could pursue her. In addition to her curiosity about his past, her most important consideration was little Karen. She liked the little girl so much that she wished to accompany her more. Kevin had suddenly said that he wanted to pursue her. It happened so randomly that she didn't have any mental preparation at all. Karen had only met him a few times. She knew very well why Kevin pursued her. When he realized that she was not his wife, he would eventually let her go. Karen, you don't need to. Sooner or later, there must be a man who to take care of you in future. No matter who he is, I hope that you can see him clearly and see if he is really good to you. Karen understood her father's concern, so she agreed obediently and stopped talking. After dinner, Karen ran around the garden downstairs. Since she recovered from her serious illness, she had always maintained her habit of exercising. Every time she broke out in a sweat, she could always clear her mind, as if all her worries had been washed away. To be honest, Samuel Daly's words further complicated the feelings of Karen's heart. Now her mind was full of Kevin. The moment she closed her eyes, she would think of his eyes, full of sparks, and his gaze, landing on hers, filled with infatuation. But this feeling wasn't hers, was it? Karen felt a burst of frustration for no reason. She couldn't explain why she was so frustrated in her heart, and she even had no mood to run. In desperation, she had no choice but to return home and decided to cool down for a while by taking a bath. Standing in front of the mirror in the bathroom, looking at the centipede-like scar on her abdomen, she could not help but reach out and touch it with her fingers. She didn't know how she had gotten the scar on her abdomen. She asked her father once, but he sighed and said nothing. After that, she never asked again. Suddenly, Karen thought of what Kevin had said to her today. He said that his wife was seriously injured in a car accident and asked the doctor to protect the child. That was to say, his wife had not given to little Karen naturally, but via a cesarean section. Then, she and little Karen. Karen quickly shook her head. Her imagination was too wild. How could little Karen have anything to do with her? When she returned to her room, the mobile phone on the bedside table was ringing. Karen walked over and found that it was a call from Kevin. Looking at the phone number on the screen, she frowned slightly. After waiting for a while, she picked up the phone and answered. What? Big Karen, are you unhappy to receive my call? When little Karen's soft voice came into Karen Daly's ear, she immediately laughed, and her voice unconsciously became gentle. I was thinking about you, and you called. I'm very happy. The tone of her voice was initially not very friendly, and the sensitive little baby girl sensed it immediately. She thought that Big Karen was unhappy to answer her phone call, and she was a little sad. However, when she heard what Big Karen said, little Karen immediately smiled happily and said, Big Karen, I've eaten a lot of strawberries and I'm full. Little Karen, don't just eat strawberries. You have to eat rice and vegetables. In this way, only can you become more beautiful in the future. Karen chided her gently. Hearing little Karen's voice, Karen seemed to be able to imagine how lovely she looked, lying on the bed, touching her belly, and kicking her feet. If little Karen was in her arms at this time, how good would it be? But little Karen pursed her pink and tender mouth. It was so complicated and saddening to her eating strawberries only wouldn't make her beautiful. But she liked strawberries very much. Little Karen was so confused that she was about to cry. Kevin held her in his arms and said, Do you want to be beautiful, or do you want to eat strawberries? I want to become beautiful, but I also like to eat strawberries. Little Karen hugged her father and said with great grievance, You may eat strawberries, but you have to eat rice and vegetables as well, which will make you even more beautiful. Kevin replied. Hearing the interaction between them, Karen smiled deeply. Okay, I'll listen to Big Karen. Okay. Little Karen, you should go to bed. Kevin took the phone from little Karen's hand and said, Let Daddy speak to Big Karen. Little Karen stared at Kevin angrily with her beautiful big eyes. Hiss. How could Daddy do this? She still had a lot of things to say to Big Karen. How could he disturb her calling? The child thought. Karen Daly said nothing. She only wanted to talk to little Karen. She wished Kevin would return the mobile phone to little Karen. Kevin did not notice the dissatisfaction emanating from Big Karen and little Karen at all. He simply said, Karen, let's have lunch together at noon tomorrow. Will little Karen be there? Karen Daly asked. As long as there was little Karen, she would agree, or she would not consider it at all. Kevin looked at his daughter and said softly, Little Karen, do you want to have lunch with Daddy at noon tomorrow? I don't want to have lunch with Daddy. Little Karen gave Kevin a proud look. Her father was not good at all. He grabbed her phone, and she could not talk to Big Karen. Tomorrow, she would ask Aunt Lynn to take her to Big Karen and have lunch with her instead. Kevin was delighted when he heard little Karen say that she was not willing to join them. This little third wheel was really sensible, but then he heard Karen saying, If little Karen is not coming, then forget it. Chapter 235. All of a sudden, Kevin Kyle felt awkward. Little Karen was not willing to go, and so Karen Daly was not willing too. It was obvious that Karen only wanted to see little Karen, not him. Kevin shook his head helplessly and said, "Little Karen, tomorrow. I will invite Big Karen to have lunch with us at noon." "Daddy, if Big Karen goes, I also want to go." Hearing Big Karen would come, little Karen immediately changed her mind. She held her father's head with her small hands and kissed him on his face. Daddy was not that bad. He knew that she liked Big Karen, so he invited Big Karen to have lunch together. Daddy is awesome, the child thought to herself. Mr. Kyle, in that case, please tell little Karen that I will meet her at noon tomorrow. Karen's voice came from the other end of the phone, and then she hung up. Kevin was upset. There was no doubt that he had been ousted by Big Karen and little Karen. The next day, when she arrived at the company early in the morning, Karen Daly received roses again. There was a card on the bouquet, and a sentence was written on the card. "You are the wind, and I am the sand. I will be with you until the end of time." Kevin Kyle. Karen was speechless. She really wanted someone to tell her that this was not Kevin Kyle, not the mature and steady man she knew. However, there was really no other man named Kevin Kyle around her. After seeing the card, even if little Karen would show up, she no longer wanted to have lunch with Kevin Kyle at noon. How? I can send a message to Kevin Kyle saying that I have to work overtime at noon. Can't have lunch with him, Karen Daly thought. Karen. Hector Cheng's voice came from the door. Karen Daly looked up and said, "Good morning, Director Cheng." Hector Cheng glanced at the roses on her desk and said, "Karen, let's have lunch together at noon." "Okay, sure," Karen replied. She was worried that she could not find a suitable reason to refuse Kevin, and this reason came to her spontaneously. Since her boss had invited her to lunch, there must be something important to discuss. She could not find any reason to refuse her boss. After Hector Cheng left, Karen immediately took out her mobile phone and sent a message to Kevin. "Mr. Kyle, my boss has something to discuss with me at noon. I am sorry that I can't have lunch with you." After sending the message, Karen Daly breathed a sigh of relief. Now she could focus on her work with a peace of mind. When Karen Daly's text message arrived, Kevin Kyle was in a meeting in the conference room, listening to the final plan of a major project. Seeing the two words Karen Daly displayed on the phone screen, the corners of Kevin Kyle's mouth twitched slightly. Everyone could see that the big boss was in a good mood. However, just after their big boss finished reading the text message, everyone found that the atmosphere instantly became tense, that it made everyone tremble. Kevin Kyle raised his eyebrows and said coldly, "Nick, how is the progress of the purchase plan of PM Corporation?" Nick hurried to report, "President Kevin, Ravio's team is negotiating with the person in charge of PM Corporation. We should be able to hear good news the next weekend." In fact, it was not so easy to buy a multinational company. It took a lot of time just to handle it. But for Ravio, these problems were not a problem. With their skilled team, no matter how difficult it was to solve these problems, it would be easy for them. However, the current meeting was regarding another important project. It was a big project that they have been preparing for nearly a year, and had invested a lot of money and manpower. It was also one of the biggest projects during the year. How could their boss mention something that was beyond his reach during such an important meeting? Many high-ranking executives in the conference room did not understand the situation, but Nick Black and Amelia Gray were clear about it. They were afraid that something had happened to Karen. "Daly, go on," Kevin Kyle said with a gloomy face. The meeting that had been interrupted and could now be continued. This time, everyone seemed to be careful when speaking, afraid of being hit by their boss's words. Karen was very busy in the morning, so time passed quickly. If it weren't for Hector Cheng calling her, she wouldn't even have realized it was time for lunch. Hector had booked a Western restaurant. He said that he had something to do in the morning. Hence, he had to go first and let Karen go there on her own. She knew that this Western restaurant was new, and it was near the office. A few days ago, she received a flyer from the restaurant, but she had not been there. When she stepped into this restaurant, it seemed that the decoration was quite romantic. It should be more suitable for couples rather than to discuss work. The waiter took her to the private room that Hector Cheng booked. It was called the Water Cloud Room. The waiter knocked on the door and said politely, "Sir, the guest you've been waiting for is here." When the door was opened, Karen smiled at the waiter politely and looked into the private room, only to find that something was wrong. The person who should have been waiting for her here was Hector Cheng. But now it was Kevin Kyle. Kevin was still wearing his usual white shirt and black trousers as well as golden frame glasses. He stood still, quietly looking at her. Karen Daly couldn't tell what kind of feeling was in her heart. Initially, she was shocked. Then she felt a little excited for no reason, and then she was at a loss. After a long time, she finally found her voice. Mr. Kyle, why are you here? Did Director Cheng also make an appointment with you? Could it be that Hector Cheng had an appointment with her to have lunch and discuss the official business? Was this business related to Kevin? Kevin Kyle did not respond to her. While looking at her, he walked to close the door behind her and locked it behind her. Karen was startled and took 2 steps back, trying to keep a distance from Kevin. Well, why are you locking the door? Karen, what did you promise me last night? Kevin approached her step by step and fixed his deep eyes on her face, as if he wanted to make a hole in her face. Karen did promise to have lunch with him, but she also sent a text message in the morning and cancelled it. Didn't Kevin see it? The next moment, Karen was pulled into his arms by the man in front of her. Her face hit his solid chest. It was so painful. He turned around and pressed her against the wall. A rainstorm of kisses fell on her forehead, between her eyebrows, bridge of her nose, and finally stopped on her red lips and lingered. Karen wanted to push him away, but she failed. She knew that when he would be so out of control, he must be mistaking her as his dead wife. Karen simply raised her fist and punched him on the back. It was useless to stop him from continuing. Standing in front of her, he was as steady as a mountain, which made her unable to breathe. She could not move him at all. The kisses lasted a long time, and Kevin finally let go of Karen. Then Karen Daly slapped him with her hand. Slap. He endured the hit, which didn't make her feel better at all. Instead, she felt a little sad. She glanced at him, bit her lip, opened the door, and ran away.